Pariyatti Audiobooks presents Chapter 13, The Essence is Anicca, from Journey of Insight Meditation by Lerner, as read by Jonathan Nelson.
Chapter 13, The Essence is Anicca. The two-bladed fan above my head cut ponderously through the thick, hot air. It was late April, and the annual 3-month heat wave was in full bloom in Madras. My own body temperature had gone amok with some indeterminate fever, and I'd spent the past 3 days in this hotel room waiting quietly for my illness to pass. It was a comfortable enough place to be sick, with its clean white walls and stone floors, and outside a balcony that overlooked gardened courtyards where huge trees reached up to the 3rd tier of rooms. The dark and faintly musky atmosphere was almost Mediterranean. I sat up and waited for the room to stop swirling. Then I greedily gobbled down a handful of vitamin C tablets and, with more restraint, a couple of bananas. God, it would be so easy to simply go home. I could be in Boston the day after tomorrow. End the suspense. Just be there. And see what the next chapter is all about. What I was doing now certainly made no sense. Fighting my way back all the way up to Calcutta in 100+ degree heat to spend all my money on 6.5 more days of meditation when I'd just done 6 months of it. Back to Burma. I'd told them I'd be back when I left. Back for what? What did they have to teach me now? I stretched out on the bed again, aware that I really didn't want to go back to Burma, yet I was doing it. Those 2 weeks there back in January had been crucial, perhaps the crucial event of this trip. But that was the past. Their lessons had been learned. And my stay in the forest in Ceylon had taught me that you can't go on repeating the same lessons. All the same, there was something I had to know, something only they could tell me. That experience, that moment that I still could not describe, the moment when my mind stopped, it had occurred again more than once since that morning alone in my hut. Was it nirvana? I had to know whether it was, because that was the only way I could know what I might be, and only they could tell me. It was well into evening when I finally made my way through customs at the Rangoon airport. I tried to call the International Meditation Center, but got no answer. I knew that someone should be there because this was the time for their retreat that coincided with the Burmese New Year. I also knew that they closed the front gate at night. So I jumped into a cab and told the driver it was worth 5 extra kyats if he got me there before 9. I hoped I would be welcome. I had written U Chit Tin a letter from Colombo a while back, but received no reply. When I arrived, the gate was still open, and a light was on in the discourse hall at the top of the hill. I trundled with my bags up the long stairway, and was startled to find Sayama, her husband U Chit Tin, and several others whom I recognized, seated around the table sipping tea. They nodded casually as I came in, as if they were expecting me. "The plane arrived late this evening," U Chit Tin remarked. Come in. Would you like some tea and fruit?" Sayama herself brought out bananas, sliced papaya, and pineapple. I stared at her flat cheekboned, pale face, rimmed by her still dark hair, pulled tightly back. Her age was not apparent. I saw both a girl and a grandmother. Her eyes were neither penetrating nor evasive. They were just there. When she handed me the fruit, she laughed. Not a giggle, but a hearty, back-slapping laugh. As usual, I was at a loss in her presence. I turned to U Tint Yi, and he smiled, almost shyly. Suddenly, I remembered how much this man, the soft-spoken chairman who commanded so much silent respect from the others, had meant to me on my first visit here. Our minds had so powerfully connected the last time. His lessons had been so lasting. I watched him calmly relight his cigar. His movements were spare, economical. Precision flowed naturally from him. "We saved a room for you," U Chit Tin said, with a feigned matter-of-factness that let me know that kind attention was being lavished upon me. "We got your letter. You didn't receive my reply?" The mail here. "But I knew you'd be here tonight." He said it so firmly that I wondered how I had been so unsure all week. "So," asked Uba Fo, the secretary, the ambassador I might have called this well-tailored man with long black hair, combed straight back, cigarette in hand, and perfect English at his command. "Tell us of your trip." And then, until it was so late that we all were nearly falling asleep, I told them about Ceylon and the monastery, and my meeting with Nyanaponika, and my plan for scholarly books and papers I hoped to write, and my friends Bhikkhu Sunno and Ratanapala, and their attempts at meditation. I listened as they told me about other groups of Westerners who had come to the center, of news of my friends back in India, and of their own health and doings. It was hard not to tell them what I really wanted to report. I dropped some hints about my meditation practice, but I knew that would have to wait. I was happy, though. I loved these people. It felt wonderful just to be in their presence, and I felt the magic in this place more strongly than when I'd been there before. "It feels like coming home," I finally said. U Chit Tin smiled and nodded appreciatively. It would be a fine week. The next day, I sat quietly in my cell, staring at the little light at the end of my nose. At tea time, when U Chit Tin asked me how the day's sitting had gone, I thought, finally, I'll get to tell him the whole story. But as soon as I described the light, he cut me off, consulted with Sayama, and informed me that I was to leave the light alone and begin with Vipassana meditation immediately. Wonderful, I thought. They recognize my state of advancement. Only one day watching the breath alone instead of the usual 3, and now on to the real thing. The following day at lunch, I cornered U Chit Tin outside the dining hall and began telling him what happened in Ceylon. Almost immediately, his attention froze into a wall. His eyes turned to mirrors, and my words bounced off his mind. He didn't want to hear what I had to say. "Enough," he held up a hand. "Too much talk. Save it for Sayama." That afternoon in my cell, the experience of the state of all mind stopping occurred again. I could hardly wait for the end of the hour to tell Sayama about it. At tea time, I asked U Chit Tin to deliver my request for an interview with her. He nodded somberly and said I could come into the hall after the last meditation of the evening. When I emerged from my cell, it was dark as I made my way to the discourse hall. Removing my shoes at the door, I entered to find nearly my entire welcoming committee at the table. I quietly took a seat and waited until I could see Sayama privately. But U Chit Tin asked me quite directly what I had to say. The teachers were all silent as I described my experience of that afternoon. I had been sitting, watching the sensations in my body, when, after a time, my concentration deepened, and I was just aware of rapid dissolution, like rain falling on a lake. As the phenomenon increased in speed, my mind grew steadier, more focused, and I became aware of my mind itself as it registered the phenomenon in my body. Then my awareness of mind process grew more rapid as well until suddenly the sensation in my body was completely quiet, like still water, until only awareness of the mind remained. I watched the bubble of mind formations until suddenly the mind simply clicked off. That's what I experienced in Ceylon as well, I added. U Tint Yi translated for Sayama, but she didn't seem to be listening. She was staring directly at me. Her eyes, as wide as saucers, transfixed me. When U Tint Yi finished, Sayama spoke a few quick words and then slapped the table with the palm of her hand. There was silence around her. She pounded the table once or twice with her fist to punctuate her loud, sing-song Burmese, repeating a few phrases at the end of quick, decisive sentences. I didn't recognize a word she said, but I knew the meaning of what she was saying. The force of it laid me back in my chair. I had always thought of Sayama as a figurehead, a symbol of the real teaching authority of the men. Now it was clear that the men were looking to her for an answer they could not provide. U Tint Yi asked a few questions for clarification, it seemed. Sayama's reply was emphatic and insistent. I looked at U Tint Yi's face as he prepared to translate what Sayama had said. The flesh on his high cheekbones tensed and his lips pursed. In a quiet, modulated voice, he told me, Sayama says that you must continue to observe the sensations in the body, over and over again. Maintain your awareness of anicca, not this quietness. Wait a minute. You didn't hear me right. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't even open my mouth, as Sayama gazed at me with curious indifference. Finally, she stared off into space, and I repeated my story, emphasizing what seemed to have been overlooked. When I finished, Sayama spoke quickly again. I braced myself instinctively against her words and listened to U Tint Yi's translation of her description of the signs one manifests before the nirvanic state. I struggled to portray them, but I knew I couldn't. Then I became furious. How could it be just that way? How could she know? I stared directly into Sayama's calm, almost sleepy eyes, and the pit of my stomach dropped through my feet as my body sagged in the chair. She was staring right through me. I had no idea what she saw, but she knew. I knew what she knew. And when she knew that I accepted that, she chuckled and looked away. My brain teetered toward collapse. U Chit Tin had been silent so far. At one point, he had gotten up from the table with a weary look on his face. He was the one I was closest to. We shared an interest in texts and ideas, and he had become almost like a father to me. He seemed pained by this whole discussion. You have been diverted, he said to me now, almost comfortingly, and then he added, it happened that way to us, too. A little smile must have crossed my lips. As I sighed, the heavy atmosphere in the room dissipated. U Ba Fo ran his fingers through his long black hair. You are in the vicinity, but you haven't hit the bullseye. When you lose the sensation in the body, U Tint Yi added, when it goes to this quietness that you describe, that is because your concentration has dropped, and you are no longer perceiving the sensations, no longer aware of anicca. The awareness of anicca must not be lost. That awareness must be maintained. It is the whole practice. Then he described precisely, almost like a technician, what must be done to keep the mind alert, aware of anicca, and how to focus the awareness to a greater and greater intensity. When he finished, there was silence. Sayama said something else, then got up and left first. We hadn't really exchanged eye contact once. My mind felt like an empty water bag. I watched the last few proud drops of my spiritual achievement drip out on the floor. Then I felt empty indeed. Chastised, put in my place, and not a little bit foolish. A jhanic state, trance, U Tint Yi commented. You have built up very strong concentration, so it was easy for it to stick to an object, the wrong object. You stopped being aware of anicca. Only the awareness, uninterrupted awareness of anicca takes you to that moment of the unconditioned. When you experienced that quietness, you lost the awareness of impermanence and strayed into the trance state. I had lost awareness and insight and had begun diving into some very pleasant, joyous state of samadhi, deep, one-pointed concentration. I laughed. It was so clear now why I had returned to Burma, though I'd been fighting coming here all the way. That's what that fever in Madras had been about. I was carrying something here, something I was afraid might get stolen. Some precious burden that I wanted to sneak through customs. My accomplishment, my spiritual certificate of achievement. All the more valuable because I earned it myself, without these precious gurus. Then why did I come here? Or rather, how had I gotten here? I sat still at the table. My mind was still humming from Sayama's words. My self-image was rubble. I sat on the pile, and my entire mind-body felt clear of all the feverishness of the past few weeks. Incredibly, I felt good. Completely defeated, my achievement wiped out, and good. Sayama had just kicked the stool out from under me, and the ground felt wonderful. The next day, I set out to get back on the track that I'd fallen off of in Ceylon, to really accomplish what I had set out to do, to experience this wholly other state of mind, nirvana, absolute freedom, a state beyond even what I had reached, mere realms of trance. It appeared to me that I was close, and I was cheerfully confident that in the 4 remaining days I could get there. After breakfast, I met U Tint Yi, and once again, in his quietly intense way, he explained the pitfalls and the way to that moment of absolute one-pointedness and insight that opened the gate to the unconditioned state. U Tint Yi's manner conveyed his teaching even more than his words. By treating my dramatic quest for liberation in a matter-of-fact, technical manner, he repeated each time, stop thinking, stop worrying, stop looking ahead. Simply do this, concentrate on this, apply your attention to this, and let the results come on their own. I steadied my mind, searching for the signs that matched the teacher's descriptions. When I left U Tint Yi, I sat for 3 hours without moving. I felt so frustratingly close to the state I sought that I barely ate anything for lunch. After resting for only a few minutes, I was back in my cell where I sat for another hour before the spasm began in my gut. For the rest of the afternoon, I lay on my side in the darkened cell, trying to sail over the waves of shooting pain that tore at my intestines in increasingly shorter intervals by riveting my attention on my breath. When the pain became overwhelming, I would bite my handkerchief to keep from screaming. Every hour, I tiptoed outside, trying not to arouse the demons in my body until I could expel them over the toilet. The next day, the diarrhea continued, but the spasm subsided enough to continue the quest. Sayama warned me to go slower, or I might not be able to bear the results. I could only agree. I stuck to watching the sensations in my body without being pulled into them, but by late afternoon, I distinctly felt my attention being drawn deeper within. The body became quiet, but that substanceless point that U Tint Yi had spoken of was there, and my attention sought its handle. My mind seemed to explode in bursts of light, while goose flesh rippled over my body. My attention was totally distracted by these events, and I couldn't regain it. But now, at least, I knew I was really close. At the evening break, when I blurted out to Sayama what had happened, her response left me silent. Stop trying for that event. Just stay with the sensations only, observing them over and over. Keep cleaning. Keep cleaning. There is more to do. What do you mean, more to do? I felt like shouting. I heard Uchit Tin vaguely in the background, repeating the instructions. Keep cleaning. There is more to do. Until his words were drowned out by the roar of my inner dialogue. Clean what? I'm ready, I tell you. And then a weird chill ran up my spine as I glanced at Sayama and knew that she was aware of my response. She sat there, perfectly quiet, her brows knitted slightly, a look of weary patience on her face, as if under some great burden. I felt as though I'd been staring into a deep, luminous glass until I saw my own reflection. My mind was still. She had silenced my argument. Then Uchit Tin abruptly changed the subject. You are lucky to be here now, these 5 days, he said. These are the days of the course Uba-kin gave for us each year, and tonight, Sunday, is the special night when the forces are strongest. Once again, that word which had entered our conversation more and more these days had a jarring, unsettling effect on my mind. I looked up at him. He was smiling, but the air of seriousness in the shrine room, where we three were seated on the wooden floor, was unmistakable. I found myself staring at the huge photograph of Uba-kin seated in a meditative pose, and then back at Sayama. It took an enormous effort, but I asked him if he could explain what he meant by those forces. There are other beings, he began, in the other planes of existence, Brahmas and Devas above us, and in terms of the span of their lifetimes, the nirvana dhatu that the Buddha brought forth is still new, still fresh. 2,500 years is like a day or less to them, and there it lives, fresh and alive, and they are just waiting to bestow it on those that can receive it. Then they sent me back downstairs to my cell, with a final reminder of this coming hour's significance. Sunday evening of this course was probably the most powerful sitting of the year. I had no idea what that meant, but I was filled with a new anticipation. I had first heard the words Nirvana Dhatu at the end of our visit here back in February, when we entered the cells facing the shrine room to pay our respects and receive Sayama's blessing. She had us begin meditating, and then directed our attention to the top of our heads to receive this Nirvana Dhatu. It had felt as though liquid electricity was being poured through my body. The sensation lasted for days afterwards. What was it? At one point, Uchit Tin had said that it was the same as anicca. That is, when you truly experience anicca, then you are experiencing the Nirvana Dhatu. I pulled the door to my cell closed and slipped the bolt. Immediately, I noticed the difference in the air, and this only added to my resolve. I actually believed that this would be the hour, that I was ready, and the spark would be kindled. For the first half hour, though, the only sparks I managed were caused by the friction of my struggle to keep my attention where I wanted it. Each time I dragged it back, the heat rose, until finally the explosion occurred. It suddenly felt as if huge weights had been dropped on my shoulders. My whole body sagged and then began to squirm under the load. I tried to sit up straight, but couldn't, and then I felt the weight accumulate on my neck, pressing my body down, bending it at the waist. My head was dropping to the floor as I struggled to right myself. I felt the weight growing, becoming some enormous, undeniable presence in my whole body. I was fighting, for an unknown reason, to keep my forehead from touching the floor, until the struggle exhausted me, and slowly, inch by inch, my torso continued to bend until my brow rested on the hardwood floor. At that instant, an image came roaring out of the blackness of my mind. A seated figure, calm and imperturbable. I recognized the image as the photograph of Uba Kin in the shrine room, was relieved by the recognition, then lost all sense of having seen before as the flat, photographic image developed itself into something with substance, three-dimensional, alive, and radiating energy, no longer at a distance, but visible, right within me. And then my body began to rise without any effort of mine. My shoulders still felt heavy. I was upright but slumping, like a rag doll propped up against a tree. Only it was the contents of my mind, that image of the teacher, that held me aloft, kept me up and blasted open for the remainder of the hour. On the fifth evening, as we sat once again in the central shrine room of the pagoda, U Chit Tin made a remark that I had heard before. Sayama says you were better the first time you came. I had told him and the others about the presence of Uba Kin the night before, and the strange events of this past day. Sitting had become increasingly difficult, and the weight on my shoulders returned. I struggled through an hour, but by the end of it I was bent over and sobbing, deep, shuddering sobs that had no source except the bottomless insubstantiality that my attention was rooted to. I had to leave the cell and sit outside. Still, the sense of emptiness would not leave, and I felt completely despondent. You see, Uchit Tin said, there are strange forces in places like forests. When you are off alone, Mara, evil, is there with you, just waiting to tempt you off the path, sometimes with hardships, but more subtly with some pleasant state or another. Now that force that overcame you is being cleansed, and you can see just how strong it is. Mara, the evil one, the force of negativity. Image of the Buddha seeking enlightenment under the solitary Bodhi tree, assaulted by the hosts of Mara in his vigil. Temptations of sensual pleasure, power, immortality. Mythological trappings to the story? No, Mara is real, or at least what Mara represents is real. Mara is right here, built into this process. Mara is the impulse, the almost gravitational pull to further suffering. The little voice that whispers, "Get up. Don't sit for an hour. It hurts. It hurts too much." And when you've gotten past that ruse, Mara has subtler and subtler ones. Somewhere out in the solitude of the forest, my ego had fought its last stand, and by feigning death, had won its survival. It made the compromise that would satisfy us both. The ego would act as though extinguished, and I would believe that I had extinguished it. But while I believed my accomplishment, the ego hung on, silent and smiling, willing now to exchange the bruising tactics of confrontation for the more effective method of deception. "You have killed your ego," it whispered so quietly, so convincingly, that I didn't even question the source. You have fought the battle of solitude and loneliness. You have achieved more than all those devotees who remained tied to Goenka, more than those rote disciples in Burma who will never cut the apron strings of their teacher, even though he is dead. You have achieved what they have struggled for all their lives, the place in the stream. You are the stream winner, the Sotapanna, the one who has attained access to nirvana. And it was all my accomplishment. It had nothing to do with my teachers. In fact, it was accomplished more easily without them. The most awesome aspect of understanding this deception, I realized as I sat there, looking at U Chit Tin's smile, was the dimension, the apparent bottomlessness of the well of self. I could no longer even pride myself on my ability to penetrate the sham, because that was another layer of sham. I thought about the ease with which one goes from watching to wanting. Now I was able to watch again, because I had been shown how. The subtle distinction between working out your own salvation and believing that it is you who is working out your own salvation seemed nearly beyond my comprehension. That is what they were pointing out to me, beginning with Sayama's assault on my mind. I had never really submitted to her, never accepted the reverence all the others showed toward her. What did she have to teach me? Nothing, except the end of all conceptions. The night she pounded the table and nullified my accomplishment, she emptied my mind, if only for a moment, of every belief it had. For an instant, I had submitted completely to her guidance and protection, because she had destroyed the element of choice. She had revealed a type of power that ended in a single moment my ability to hold her at a distance and decide on her abilities. She had blasted that distance, and now I felt her inside me, examining me directly and determining exactly who I was in a way I would never be able to do. She was looking right through me. I knew that the descriptions of my experience that I was offering were unnecessary, that she could somehow judge whether I had attained anything or not by simply looking. That is how much she could see. Thus, her assessment was nearly unbearable, because there was absolutely no way to dismiss it. I struggled with it, struggled with myself, but she was relentless. The tones she used drilled right through me. How could anybody be so sure? How does she know? Yet she did. I looked at her and knew that I didn't know anything. This middle-aged grandmother, who showed more concern about preparing lunch than meditating, who could flip through a comic book while U Chit Tin and I struggled over a point of doctrine, who never bothered to talk when she could laugh, knew it all. The formal period of my meditation was just about over. I would be leaving Burma the next morning, beginning my journey home. It was still a little hard, adjusting to the realization that the trip was ending without the experience that I was so sure I had achieved just a while back. I felt a lingering ambiguity, a lack of certainty about the significance of much that I'd been through. At my last tea time gathering with the teachers, I was seeking some clarification. Sayama was not at the table. It was only U Chit Tin, U Ba Pho, Goenka's brother, and myself. U Chit Tin was interested in telling me stories about U Ba Kin, but I tried to steer him back to the topic of nirvanic experience. I thought I was being subtle. I was looking for an appraisal, a forecast, what I might expect, how far I had to go until I might experience. He knew just what I was fishing for. He smiled and started to clean his glasses. "Do you know what parami is?" he asked, almost innocently. I thought I did. It was a technical term for spiritual ability or propensity. When I'd heard it before, I thought it meant that some people simply meditated better than others. They had more parami, just as some people are born more intelligent than others. Somehow, just the way U Chit Tin asked me the question made me realize that I didn't understand parami completely. He started talking about lifetimes, about the process of existence that is beginningless and endless, in which this body, this person whom we recognize as ourselves, is nothing but a phase, a passing moment. When Hover had first mentioned it a couple of years ago, it hadn't registered at all. Now it made some sense. What I had found deep within this mind and body was a process. The process manifests itself over and over again, birth after birth, in endless forms. We aren't a soul or entity that exists and jumps from body to body. We don't transmigrate, we change. We alter moment after moment. We alter, and each lifetime is just another moment of alteration in this stream of energy. The alteration is not random. Randomness is not a characteristic of the universe. The universe is really mind. Mind precedes all, the Buddha observed. The mind has purpose, will. The will comes from desire, from hatred, from anger, from delusion. Or the will comes from love, from non-attachment, from wisdom. We become what we will. We are what we have willed. The stream of energy that is endless is a wheel. That is the image of suffering. We turn the wheel with our minds steeped in delusion and attachment. We come into being, into bodies whose nature is decay and suffering because we will that. This is the law of karma. Buddha said he was here to teach the end of this suffering, the way off the wheel. Nirvana is the end of becoming. It is just being. The body ends, and the life energy requires no new body. The chain of birth and death is broken because the mind has been so purified of its attachments that it takes hold of no new form. This is deathlessness. To get there, I had believed, you sit and you sit and you sit. U Chit Tin smiled at my beliefs as a patient father would at his child's recitation of a fairy tale. We cannot comprehend, he said, the paramis that must be developed to achieve that freedom, parinirvana. Our suffering is so beginningless. He paused to see if I could even approach that notion. How long it takes to reverse that, to build up the ability that we must have to get free. He shook his head as if it wasn't even worth imagining. And also, what we must achieve for that, he went on, is very difficult to comprehend. There are many paramis, he said. In the end, we must have them all. Some sit well, very well. They have very deep meditation, and it helps them on this path. But there is more, too. We work very hard for this nirvanic experience in our meditation, yes? But whether it comes in this lifetime or another, we still must work hard to develop parami. We develop giving to others, right conduct, patience, wisdom, loving kindness. We work for ourselves and for others. Otherwise, we do not build our parami. I was aware of how myopic my vision had become, how intense my preoccupation with spiritual achievement. Meditation had no relation to others for me. It was about solitude and loneliness and the confrontation with my mind. Necessary, absolutely necessary, but only a part of this path. To teach, Uchit Tin told me, to help others on this path is a very special gift. Then he began to tell me about his marriage to Sayama. He had known her even when she was a young girl in the town where they lived. Then a local astrologer had predicted to him that his wife would excel him in spiritual matters. For a while, Uchit Tin and Sayama were the typical Burmese couple. He, a young accountant in government service, and she, a wife and mother. He had already been meditating under U Ba Khin's tutelage for a few years when he took her to his teacher for a course of instruction. Uchit Tin smiled at me. In 10 days, he snapped his fingers, she got the whole of the Dharma. Afterwards, Sayama rarely left U Ba Khin's side when he taught. They moved onto the grounds of the center, living in separate quarters on the sanctified grounds, and for 25 years they served their teacher. When U Ba Khin died, Sayama nearly despaired. She didn't think she would be able to teach without her guru, and the center remained closed, due both to the political situation in the country and the problems of U Ba Khin's survivors. But now, through no real efforts of their own, it was open once more, and they were all busy again, teaching, serving, glad of it. Uchit Tin told me that for a while he had been suffering from high blood pressure, but now it was better. He was doing the most important work of all, giving to others this precious gift, Buddha's way. Dana Parami, the perfection of giving. Who can willingly make a life's work of serving others? What must be the purity of mind to let go of personal situation and become an instrument to serve others? This, as much as jhana or unconditioned states, is the road to Buddhahood. We are happy, Uchit Tin concluded. He wasn't particularly looking backward over a lifetime or to what lay ahead. A simple fact of life. Unmistakable. Unlike any expression of satisfaction I'd ever heard anyone use to describe their life. And that was the reason why anyone who visited this place left so much richer than when they arrived. These people could teach you not only how to meditate, but how to live. Uchit Tin had one more surprise for me. Each evening after tea, the Burmese disciples, some 20 or so, gathered in the discourse hall before the great empty chair of the master to listen to tape recordings of his sermons in Burmese. I sat outside, transfixed by the low, resonant voice, wishing the words were available as well. On this last evening, though, I was about to hear the one tape U Ba Khin had recorded in English. A talk called The Essentials of Buddha Dharma in Practice. As you sit, you must meditate, Uchit Tin instructed me, looking carefully to see if I understood. He seemed almost mischievous, as if bidding me to open my mouth and close my eyes to receive a big surprise. I sat down cross-legged on the floor in front of the teacher's big empty chair. For progress in Vipassana meditation, a student must keep knowing anicca, impermanence, as continuously as possible, U Ba Khin began. The continuity of awareness of anicca is the secret of success. The last word of the Buddha, just before he breathed his last and passed away into the great final nirvana, was impermanence, or anicca, is inherent in all component things. Work out your own salvation with diligence. His words, like Goenka's, I thought, have that unmistakable power to disarm, to diffuse the mind and penetrate with meaning. Goenka's voice was more dramatic, more theatrical in a way, spellbinding in style. U-Ba Khin's is mind clicked off. My little running commentary that accompanied the digestion of his words expired. Now only U-Ba Khin and I were left. His voice was deep and reasonable, emitting a rumbling of certainty that completely stilled my measurement of his words, his phrases, his ideas. In Vipassana meditation, he said, one contemplates not only upon the changing nature of matter, but also upon the changing nature of mind, the thought elements projected toward the process of change in matter. As he said it, I observed my mind disintegrate. Thought, awareness, consciousness itself was no longer an entity, a solid blob of me. It was a continuum of microscopic events, like little cartoon thought balloons, popping at a dizzying rate of speed. You should also know, U-Ba Khin informed me, that anicca can be understood through other types of feeling as well, by contact of visible form with the sense organ of the eye, by contact of sound with the sense organ of the ear. Everywhere now. Touch sensation of air against skin, sound of rustling feet against ear, white light flashing against inner eye. Anicca, anicca, anicca. Reality. I was melting under his words. Be aware, he was pointing. No place in particular to look. It is everywhere, in everything. Anicca. The word has no translation anymore. It just is. The perception of things as they are. Anicca is a symbol of their essence, their essential nature. Not this, not this, not this. Change alone. What is change? Not this thing changes. No, the reality is not this thing, this tree, this chair, this word, this sound, this idea, this perception. They are not reality. The moment of contact between inner mind and external object is the locus only, while the event that transpires there is anicca. Change. Chant the word forever, and it goes on changing that much longer and longer. Nothing is, only change. The tape recorder clicked off. A moment later, I felt a stiffness in my joints that I had been totally unaware of during the 40 minutes of U-Ba Khin's recorded talk. U Chit Tin had on the Cheshire Cat's smile when I opened my eyes. I had trouble moving. My body had not yet come together. It felt completely porous. I continued to hear U-Ba Khin's voice. No, rather, I sensed his presence still. How could the tape capture so much? U Chit Tin and I said little to each other. The message had been clear. On the morning of my flight back to Calcutta, I received Sayama's blessings in the shrine room. U Chit Tin repeated the Buddha's words to his disciples. Go ye forth for the good and welfare of all. Then he nodded to Sayama, and she reached behind her and handed me a small marble Buddha statue. Her smile as she handed me the statue was not an indication of mere gracious bestowal, but rather a laughing reference to the hard time I'd given her all week. I sighed. No nirvana, so I get a statue for a consolation prize. I hadn't given up until the last. Even last night, after hearing the tape of U-Ba Khin, I returned to my cell thinking, this could be it. But it wasn't. Something else was happening. That porous feeling was still with me. I was having a little trouble focusing my attention on objects. Everything kept dissolving. Now, as I closed my eyes and listened to Sayama chant her blessings to me, I felt like a neon tube. "Put your attention at the top of your head," Uchit Tin whispered. I felt illuminated, as if I were a glowing light bulb. Slowly, I bowed forward until my head touched the floor near her foot. "Thank you, Sayama," my heart said. No nirvana, but something else. Something beyond words. Change. The change in me. I know it. Can't say it yet. It is all different now. "Come," Uchit Tin finally said. "Breakfast. And then we must be going." The fork hung midway between plate and mouth as I stared humbly at it. The touch of the silver on my fingers, the weight in my hand. My fingers were like shadows. I bit into the food and was awed as my jaws slowed to a ponderous, grinding movement. It was all so amazing, as if the whole movie had been slowed down to a flickering procession of images before me. Nothing had any solidity. Not me, not it. The big melt. Sounds rattled the bones in my ears. My nose trembled under smells. Everything was quivering, pulsing. Everything was alive, momentary life. My attention couldn't isolate anything, couldn't freeze anything. Backdrops were collapsing, horizons sinking, points of reference exploding. Goodbyes were formal as always, just another event. Of course. You're leaving. Safe journey. Uchit Tin, Sayama, Utint Yi, I love you all. Of course, their smiles said. Of course. Don't you understand? I do. At least, I think I do. That is, I don't. They smiled. Very good. What's to understand? Sayama was bustling about, ready to start lunch preparations. Uchit Tin was getting ready to leave for the office. The grandchildren were pedaling around on their tricycles, and some women were watering the flower pots. Explain the mystery of it all, Sayama. What mystery? She would probably reply.
Pariyatti, a nonprofit 501c3 organization, offers a wide variety of books, eBooks, videos, and audiobooks about the teachings of the Buddha, the Pāli language, and Vipassana meditation. Browse our complete catalog at www.pariyatti.org.